welcome to Global Compliance Panel's live webinar on developing and implementing an effective product specification. My name is Ricardo, and I am going to be your host for today. On behalf of the Global Compliance Panel team, I would like to thank you for being part of this event. Today's webinar will be presented by Angeline Benjamin. Ms. Benjamin is the president of B&B Food Safety Solutions. Angeline approaches her clients' issues with the results oriented from strategic, tactical, and operational perspective. Her objective is to provide food safety management and quality assurance solutions to clients in the food industry who have the vision for quality and risk management as part of a strategic plan. Angeline has been involved in the quality assurance and food safety business for over 29 years. Angeline began her quality assurance career at Hut Western Foods. She then worked for Denny's, Carnation, and lastly Taco Bell, which is part of Yum Brands group that includes KFC, Pizza Hut, Long John Silver's, and A&W. Angeline held different positions while she was with Yum Brands. All of them involve crisis management, food safety, and regulatory affairs. We are honored to have such a distinguished person such as Ms. Angeline Benjamin with us to present this webinar. Before we begin, I would like to inform you of the program outline for this training session. This webinar is for 60 minutes duration. First, Angeline would take you through today's webinar, highlighting the areas that she would cover, and she would then share with you her presentation. We would also like to inform all of our participants that once you do join the teleconference, you have been placed on mute and will remain so until the Q&A begins towards the end of the webinar. It is for the purpose of avoiding discontinuity and for allowing the presenter to speak clearly so that everyone present can take maximum benefit from this webinar. We also request all to hold back your questions until the Q&A window begins. 10 minutes of time will be allotted for the Q&A, during which your questions will be answered. If for any reason you do get logged out of this training session, I request you to follow the same procedure to join in again. Now that we are all ready to start, I request Ms. Benjamin to take it from here. Angela?
Thank you, Ricardo. Good morning, everybody. And again, today the topic, developing and implementing an effective product specification. So these are the areas that we are going to cover today. First, we're going to cover the detailed description which effectively define the product physical characteristics. And then we're going to incorporating the quality control points, validating the chemical, physical, microbiological tolerances. And then we're going to define testing and verify verification expectation. I'm going to go over the common regulatory and company requirement to be included in the specification. Then I'll review briefly on the document control methods. And then I'm going to bring up a few things that the key components to be included in the specification in order for the specification to be effective. And then I'm going to give you example of best practices, do and don't, when creating new product specification. Again, this is based on my experience in the past. And then we're going to go over issue and challenges needed to address before you finalizing product specification. Then I'll open up for the questions. Okay, what makes an effective product specification? Okay, and again, based on my experience, this is what we learned. It's very important you should have a detailed description of the product and incorporating quality control points, validating the chemical and the physical and microbiological tolerance. So in other words, when you set certain tolerances, you want to make sure this is realistic. You need to define the testing and the verification of expectations because there are many different ways of testing. Sometimes you may have different test results just because the testing is slightly different. And as a result, it may show that it's out of spec, but actually the product is in spec because what the manufacturer did and what you did may not be the same way, your customer. Also include common regulatory and company requirements. include the proprietary ingredients and formula if this is applicable. And also you need to include policy procedure for changing the key ingredient source of ingredients. Now, one thing, the reason I said that, because sometimes, just changing a minor thing that may change the whole product, and you don't know that until then you investigate and you found out there's one of key ingredient has been changed. Okay, give an example of, so I'm going to give example of product physical characteristics. Let's go over an example of, let's say, spinach. Okay, so the detailed product description of this is like, is it a whole or a chop? So it's very important that you need to specify that. And then also, if you say spinach, okay, what type of spinach is it? Is it a baby spinach or regular spinach? So that needs to be defined too. And another one, also, are they pre-washed, double washed, prepackaged, etc. And then also needs to describe what you consider to be acceptable appearance. And many of these many products, they do have a standard of identity that you can find out. So, for example, in spinach, you want to describe like the color, dark green with no significant discolor or damaged leaf. And how the product is going to be used, that's also important to describe in the spec, and then list any of special consideration. So when we want to incorporating the quality control point, for example, for produce specification, again, I'm giving you an example, you need to describe the raw material standards first. Okay, what are the minimum requirements for the raw ingredients? If applicable, use the U.S. grade. And also, you need to list the size, the shape, the length, and dates from harvest, geographical or country of origin limitation. So, for example, if you don't want this product coming from certain country, you need to list that in the spec. And then conformant with the good agriculture practices and commodity marketing agreements. You need to list also the analytical measurements. For example, the physical, the chemical, the microbiological testing requirements. List the acceptable limits, the range, and targets. And why I'm saying that, because sometimes, when you give certain range, when the range is so big, and one supplier provided on the lower one, and another supplier provided on the upper one, and it may change the appearance or the quality of the product, but yet they're meeting the spec. So you need to be very realistic about that, the expectation, and when you give that list of limits, that you be aware this is what is still considered acceptable. So you may want to say that, yes, the limit range is here, the target is this one, and then you give a range, for example, so many % of them can be, in the high range or low range. So I'm just giving you examples. Sometimes that can make a big difference in the quality of product or appearance. Example of the produce specification, again, just you need to list the finished product standards after the raw material. For example, the finished product, the sensory. What's the appearance that you want? What's the color you want? What's the flavor you want? What's the texture? And under the physical, the mechanical damage. What is considered to be the defective product? The mechanical damage. Describe the limits that are acceptable to the regulatory and the company standards. So, for example, you want to say less than 5% thorn leaf. So be very specific, less than how many percent from the sample size. And then you need to specify what is considered to be the sample size. And what is considered to be defects. Are they critical, major, or minor? So be very specific what the defects are. And then also describe the acceptable limits. So, for example, you put less than 5% wilting, tip burn, etc. So this is, again, example of produce. so by doing that, you know that this is what is considered to be still acceptable product. And to incorporate chemical and microbiological standards, so you need to do that. And for example, on the chemical standards, you need to describe whether at time of pack or the concentration and the finished product and all the raw material, because the chemical standard may be different if you don't specify when that product is being tested. Okay? List the test method, and this is very important too, because some lab may have different test methods, and if you don't describe them, they will use what they think is common for them, but may not be necessarily that you are aware about this. So you want to make sure that you list the test method. And like I mentioned to you, need to list the target, the minimum, and maximum acceptable limit. For example, if you have a sauce that you need to put like the pH. Okay, the sauce pH is the range that is acceptable between 3.8 to 4.0. But the target is that you want is 4.0. And the salt content, again, described by the unit of the measurement. The fat content, the sugar content, the percent of solid bricks. So those are the examples that you want to be very specific. And then for microbiological standards, you need to list the standard that is applicable. Again, like I mentioned to you earlier, when you want to test it, time of pack, finished product, raw material at receiving, all the time when the shelf life is valid. So just, again, with produce, because microbiological standards, when you test a produce at the time of receipt or at the time when they're almost expired, it can make a big difference in the test results. And so you don't want to put the spec that not describing that time of when you need to do the testing, because you may think this product is out of spec because the microbiological count is too high. But you don't realize that maybe you tested this when the product is about to expire, and then when the supplier or when you listed the spec, you meant for at time of pack. Okay, so that's very important. List the technical name of the bacteria and the maximum acceptable limit. So, for example, if you want to test for E. coli, generic, you want to put generic instead of E. coli 0157H7. So, and then put the 1.1 per gram, and then again, put the method. What method do you want? MPN method, for example. And coliform, okay, you want to, what count do you want? And also, you need to include pathogen testing applicable to the commodity risk assessment. Not all pathogen bacteria are applicable for commodity risk assessment. So in this example, for example, I will tell you that in produce, it's very common that you always will see a Salmonella and E. coli 0157H7. And that's always have to be negative, and there is no two way about it. Now, when you are validating chemical, physical, and microbiological tolerances, is very, very important, again, that you need to use reputable, independent laboratories. And why we say that, because we want to make sure that the test is valid, number one. Number two, if there's ever a question come from the regulators, that you can say, well, the product is tested by independent reputable lab. And so this is not something that is being, selected on certain and the test methods. And also you want to use a product expert or microbiologists or scientists to validate the realistic of the test results, especially if you are wanting to test this from many different vendors, okay, because vendors may have different test results, and they may try to justify theirs are the realistic one, and another vendor do the same thing. So you need to have a third party to validate this and to say this is a realistic one. Okay, you want to request several data points to validate the product test results. And yeah, please don't run just one test because, as you know, especially with microbiological tests, one result doesn't really tell you much of anything. If you're using a pH or water activity values to determine products to be considered non-potentially hazardous, okay, then again you need to test the sample of products from several production dates in order to get the really realistic data. And also you need to test the sample from several lots. Now, what are we defining the testing and verification expectations? Okay, like I mentioned to you, always include the test method and references in the specification. Okay, and so because of that, then the laboratory will use that method, the same method over and over again. So again, like I mentioned to you earlier, for example, the test for coliform, you want to state whether you want MPN method or a plate count method. That could be very, very different, the test results. And then when you're testing the finished product, you need to indicate the stage of product being tested. Is this product as ready to eat or it needs further process? And minimum or maximum limit of specifications. So are they equally acceptable? So do you would like to be in the minimum or maximum? You know, what percentages of targets that you desire, like I mentioned to you earlier. Now, I want to go over the common regulatory and the company requirements to be included in the spec time. As you know, with many products, there's two main regulatory agency that you need to really investigate and to make sure they are the products are meeting this standard is USDA and FDA. Okay, so for example, the United States Standard for grades of vine that effective January 17, 2008. So I'm just giving this example that the USDA would put that the grade of the vine is grade US number 1 or US number 2. So you have to choose which one that you want or both. And what's your tolerances is that the defect limit for each grade. And then the size, classification. What will be the minimum and the maximum diameter that is acceptable to you? Especially if you want to use this product, maybe like to serve as a final product, you don't want too many ranges, like from a really small one to really big one, because then you may not be able to have a good size of serving because they're just not possible to serve that way. And then also variety of definition. Definition of what is considered to be damage and serious damage of tomatoes, such as, puffiness and what we call that cat faces and growth cracks, scars, and cuts, etc. What happened? Not moving forward. Okay. Now, also what you need to make sure that you are familiar with the company requirement, your own company. So sometimes why I mention this, that the regulatory requirement may be considered to be your minimum standard, okay? And then you want to look at your company requirements and what will be your minimum standard and what will be your quality standard. And again, this is may be a factor because of the pricing. Sometimes, you may want to what you want and what certain department wants may be different. So you want to make sure that you, when you write the spec, that the pricing of this product is considered too, because it may not be realistic to have a spec that something that that you cannot afford to have a product that's the spec that you want. But also at the same time that you don't want to have a product that the spec was just too low to the point that you don't like the quality of the product that you receive. And also, because of that, you need to know what are you going to use this product. Is that as an ingredient or as a finished product? So that can also make a big difference. And another one is acceptable substitution, okay? And in my experience, this will happen quite a bit, especially with produce. As you know, produce, we depend on Mother Nature. So sometimes because of the season, because of flood, because of whatever it is, let's say certain product that you want is really very short or not, not accessible, or it's so pricey that it's just not possible for you to have this as the pricing that you have set up. So because of that, you may need to have some kind of like acceptable substitution. Or sometimes, there is a product recall. So, there is no product available anymore at this time. So then you have to decide what you need to do with this product. So this is all about the priority that needs to be discussed within your company. What will be your priority if you need to substitute the product? So, for example, I'll give you an example, tomatoes again. That you have, let's say, a Roma tomato is in your spec. Okay, so you need to have a spec what variety you want. And let's say there's sort of Roma tomatoes, or the pricing of Roma tomato is so high, then you have to decide, okay, what other product or what other tomatoes that I can substitute this? Because as you know, Roma tomatoes, the skin is very thick and they're firm. So then if you substitute with something that is so easily broken or soft, they may not have a good quality of a finished product if you present it as is. But if it's something, to be diced, maybe it's not as important. But maybe if the tomato is so soft, it may not last as long. So that's something that you need to consider. So that's why I said the use of the tomatoes as a topping, side dish, or what? And then again, the tomatoes, do you want it as a whole, a dice, or slice? So now let's go on the document control method with the specification standard. Okay, sometimes, you do have like an option that you can have what we call a document control method in specification and standard. And the following programs are to be documented and maintained when you do this method. For example, you need to have a written HACCP program, and then it has to be effective, and then in progress, in other words, it has to be effective and working. Your foreign material control, so in other words, as you know, there's always certain foreign material that may not be considered critical, maybe it's minor, but then you want to make sure that it's documented, like, what foreign material is considered acceptable or not acceptable at all. And then the formula specification, again, as you know, sometimes that with the formula, if this formula is proper, like it's your own secret formula, you want to make sure that you guard that and it to be under control. specification and quality requirement for all your raw products needs to be um, set up, and your raw materials, the packaging, and the finished product testing, and like I mentioned to you before, to records of product that is produced and it's shipped, so that will conform to the current specification and appropriate regulatory requirement and guidelines. And then conformance to the specification after production. And formulation is measured at what specific sample size. And then how often do you do this? And then also the methods indicated in the quality requirement. And also any documentation when there is a product recall or product withdrawal. Now, I'm going to go over a procedure for inspecting incoming materials here. When you are receiving products, raw materials and packaging are established, you want to ensure that ingredients are from approved supplier and meet specification requirements based on the in-house testing. And again, you may want to have a certification of analysis or a letter of guarantee. And then you want to make sure that the records are maintained, so you know that each time when you receive raw materials, this is what you receive. And product handling and control of non-conforming products are to be established. So you need to establish that and the action taken of non-conforming products to make sure that they are handled properly. And this is so critical that you need to have a record to be maintained. Because if, let's say, the non-conformings are, for some reason, accidentally get used, you want to make sure that how is this accidentally happened. So that's why you always have to have records. And also the handling of non-conforming products. Where do they go? When you destroy them, is there any evidence or confirming that the product is really destroyed? Procedures for identification, segregation, disposition of non-conforming raw materials, packaging, and finished products are established. So you do need to have procedure for each of this. And again, I cannot repeat this more. Records are to be maintained. So as you can see here, so many records are very important that you maintain this. Because when there is a product recall, at least you can look at the product, which one is affected, which one is not. So, but if you don't have any of these records, when there are a product recall, basically the regulator will say, well, then I guess if you really don't know what product that's affected by this product recall, then maybe we just have to destroy everything. So that's why, to me, to have a record is very, very important. Next, I want to go over the key components, what needs to be included when we write the spec, okay? It's very important that you describe, like I mentioned to you earlier, so now, I say this again, the title of the name of a product listed in the specification. So, for example, I'm giving another example here. Example, you want onion spec, okay? You need to know what onions do you want. Don't just put onions. Do you want red onions, white onions, yellow onions, sweet onions, etc.? So it has to be specific. As you know, there's many types of onions. And then you want to make sure for documentation purposes, you want to have a specification number set up. So like here, I'm giving you an example that you want to abbreviate. For example, if the product is a fresh produce, you maybe want to put FP what number, fresh produce. And then if the product is processed produce, then you want to put PP because that's processed produce. Just an example. For example, you want to have a spec for processed meat. You just put PM and then you put the number because there are many, different specs you're going to have. So then you can start the number. And I always like the idea of always start with 20 because as you know that you're going to have more than 10 sometimes, so that will help. And then another one, if the spec is a frozen product. So if it's frozen meat, maybe you put FM something. So by doing that, you have an organized spec number instead of figuring it from 1 to 200 or 300 something. At least you know this will be organized that way. Then another important thing is that you need to know what version of spec it is because that for your record keeping, but also for your knowledge, knowing that how often you have to revise the spec. Okay, so if the version is the version of 15, well then you know this spec has been revised 15 times. And because each time when you revise, you change the version. So then you know what has changed. Effective date. Again, this is for your customer. Also, it's very important that you want to know when this spec starts to be effective on, the date, and then also when this product is this spec being revised. And another one is very important that the person who developed this spec. Okay? Now, under approved by, it is a good idea that to have at least 2 positions or 2 names that who sign off for a final specification approval. And I'm saying at least. And why it is because you want to make sure that, again, to validate and having the spec to be effective, it takes more than one person to really check and approve this. So my suggestion, it is very, very important, at least 2 name or position that it will sign off the spec. Product description. Detail, like I mentioned to you, detailed description of product and how the product is to be used. So to be used directly, for further use, process, pre-cook, ready to eat. And then, okay, let me give you an example of flour tortilla. Okay, flour tortilla, you want it die cut or heat press? What size do you want? And again, when you put 8 inches or 10 inches, are they the target? So then what, so because of that, the product description, it says 8 inches heat press, let's say, for example. What it means is that this is what your target is. You want 8 inches. Okay? Frozen, whether this product is at room temperature, frozen, or what. Raw materials or ingredient standards. Certain raw materials or ingredients need to have their own specification. Okay? And you want to make sure, like I mentioned to you again, regulatory and company standards need to be included both. If the product is a process, again, you want to receive the standards as being a frozen, uncooked chicken received or versus frozen, pre-cooked chicken. Okay, you want to, for example, with onion, do you want the onion to whole onion or a diced onion? Okay, when you receive that, or when you process them. So it's very important that be very specific. And also, like I mentioned to you, sensory, physical, chemical, and microbiological standards for each spec. Now, let's go to the finished product standard now. Okay, so with finished product standard, what would be your spec? So let me give you an example on that, on the tomatoes. Is it as a final product you want it diced tomatoes or fresh whole cherry tomatoes? Is the finished product a sauce or like produce sometimes like spinach? Is the finished product to be triple washed, prepackaged, ready to use? So it needs to be very specific. Triple wash, prepackaged, ready to use. So when you specify that, so for example, the end user know this product is no longer to be washed because it has been triple washed. It's prepackaged. Therefore, all the operator has to do, open the package and use it. So that is what, is very important. And another thing that you do need to have sensory, physical, chemical, and microbiological standards. Shelf life. When we're talking about shelf life, again, is it a total shelf life? For what? For the source base? Or the total shelf life after it's processed? Or the total shelf life of a new crop versus storage? As you know, for example, with potatoes, many potatoes are harvested once a year. So what's the shelf life from the new crop, or this is a storage product? And also shelf life remaining at the store delivery. For example, if you are using this to your end user or to the grocery store, what is the shelf life remaining that you want this product to be delivered there, so the end user still have plenty of shelf life to use. Okay, and then also you want to make sure that as an end user, you want to know what is the shelf life after opening. Okay, storage temperature need to be very specific. What is considered to be an acceptable, or sometimes it requires storage temperature. Room temperature, it means acceptable, at room temperature. Well, it depends upon where the room temperature is. So you need to also be specific as far as temperature. And the reason I said this, because I noticed, especially in the summer, okay, the summer in the state of Washington, temperature may be different in the state of Arizona or the state of Florida or the state of New Hampshire. And so that's something you need to think about that. Now, refrigerated temperature also, you want to be very specific. What is considered acceptable? 34 to 38? That's another example. If you say frozen, again, what temperature is considered to be acceptable for frozen? Because certain products needs to be at least like 0 degree, or some products, if they're frozen, 10 degree is still acceptable. So that's something that you need to be very specific. Another one, to state a process requirement, if applicable, of course. And this is an example is for potentially hazardous ingredients that you want to make sure that specify to use a hazard plan as part of the process requirement. Then the next one, and that also is as important, the last one is packaging. Okay, if the packaging is not effective, or if you don't have the spec for packaging, you may have a very, very good product, but if the packaging is not good, it may destroy the product. So it's very important that you do have to have a packaging spec too, and standards. The packaging material, what is considered acceptable for the material for this product. The pack size. Sometimes, as you know, the larger the pack, the less the cost. But sometimes it may not be as effective if the use is not much. So because what happens, either your end user will destroy or not using the product, but sometimes, the end user may not want to destroy this when the product has expired. So the product that is not acceptable may be used. So having a large pack may not be as effective. So it depends upon the usage and the needs of the product. So you need to verify what the pack size that you want. Label information is, again, very important, because certain label that you need to provide due to the regulatory requirements, certain products that you have to label certain things to make sure that it meets the regulatory requirements. Okay, So I listed all of the key components. It doesn't mean that this is it. I just listed for you the key components. You can add some more. That is depend upon what your company needs is, what your company requirement is. So, but all the list that I provided earlier basically are the common key component that always needs to be in the spec. Okay, now I'm going to go over best practices when creating a product spec, product specification. Remember I told you that, a person who writes a spec, in order for that person to be able to write a spec effectively, that person needs to develop a specification approval team. Because this team, the one that will help you and work with you to make sure that the spec is realistic, and then these people will be the one that also approve the spec. So you need to determine who will need to approve the spec once they are developed and finalized. You need to select the team from different departments with diverse knowledge. Procurement, well, you need that because they're the one that will know the price, the commodity. So because of that, they need to provide you with input on the reality of this product. Menu development. Why menu development is important? Because they're going to use this product for their product when they develop the menu. So they need to provide input. Quality assurance, quality control. Well, they're the one that for the food quality and the food safety. So they need to provide you the input. Packaging, like I mentioned to you, you can have a very good product. If the packaging is not, good or doesn't meet a standard, you can destroy the product. So packaging people that knows about packaging need to provide you with feedback for the standard. Legal. Why legal needs to get involved? Well, because certain products, when they're not meeting spec and you use it anyway, what will be the consequence? So you want to make sure that when you put something in the spec, that is enforceable. Food technology, again, I put in here because, again, to evaluate the effectiveness of the data and what the standard you want to do. Microbiologist. Why? Because when you have a microbiological standard from 3 or 4 different vendors, you want to know which one is the realistic one. And operation, and what I mean by operation, people in the field, they are the one that's using it. Or if this is for a retail, when I mean by operation, the retail, the customer, you want to make sure that is this what the customer wants, okay? Product expert, I always like to include this because they will give you another opinion besides what you know. So it's always a good idea to have a third party to validate something that you're looking for. When you need to work with the supplier, this is very important. Do not develop specs in a vacuum. Work with the supplier, the distributor, the product expert, menu developer, quality assurance, operation, etc., to make sure the specification is realistic, that everybody agrees this is the one we want for our product. And if you develop a new product specification that is a brand specific to your company, you want to make sure that you list what is the proprietary ingredient, because this is something that can be a legal issue that for some reason that this product, being copied or something, and yet this is a list of proprietary agreement that you want to make sure that your supplier knows this is, something that you want to guard. List the ingredients that are available to other suppliers. Okay, because when you have the spec, you want to think not just one supplier you're going to have. You're going to have 3, 4, 5 suppliers. So you want to make sure that what the ingredients you list, that is something accessible or available. List the ingredient that can or cannot be substituted. you have to be very specific. If this ingredient, can you substitute with another one? Okay, and that's why you have product expert and menu development, for example. And you want to make sure that you have two lists, something that can be substituted and something cannot. And why something cannot be substituted? Because you know it's going to change the quality. It's going to change the taste of the product. It's going to change the appearance of the product. And your end user may consider, well, wow, this product is not the same anymore. But yet, you thought it's meeting the spec. Because what happened, somebody, substitute this, and then you don't list it as being allowed to, not allowed to be substituted. So that's very important that you need to list that. Be aware of certain supplier proprietary ingredients and formula. Because if you decide that you want to, let's say you have another supplier, you want to duplicate this product because you want to have secondary or third supplier. But then what you don't realize when you work with the first supplier, you have their proprietary ingredients. So therefore, if you want to develop the product with the new supplier, the second or the third, you may not be able to develop that product or duplicate because of their proprietary ingredient or formula. So that's something, be very aware when you are developing the spec, developing the product, dealing with the proprietary formulas with your original supplier. And when you develop the spec, when developing the targets and the limit for physical, chemical, and microbiological standards, you need to search for more than one source for the standards, like I mentioned to you. That don't rely on one supplier or one source. Look around and see what is the typical acceptable standard for this product. But then also test it. Test the standard. Use the independent lab to test the standard. Okay? And be aware of product standards of identity and other regulatory requirements, including packaging and labeling. Okay? List allergen ingredients if applicable, because nowadays, as you know, that it's very, very important, and in many states are required now that you list the allergen ingredients. And so you need to make sure that you be aware about all the allergen that you use, and then you need to list that. Be aware of certain ingredients such as MSG and sulfites. Even though they are not ingredients, many people are sensitive to that. So if you don't list them, and let's say your end user may not know that you use it. So, and if they're sensitive to it, then it's very difficult for the end user to know this product contains MSG or sulfite. Another one, check if have the supplier tested and confirmed in writing that they can and able to meet the spec. So when you issue the spec to the supplier, and again, your manufacturer, which is then your raw materials, and if your end user, if your supplier and the manufacturer, make sure that whoever receives the spec confirm in writing that they're able to meet your spec. Because if they don't, and if, let's say, along the way the product's being produced, it may be a legal issue that they can say, well, we never agreed, we never signed, and we never received that really which one is the final spec that you want. So that's why it's going back into, again, the date. So when you submit the date, effective date, final spec, make sure the supplier sign off on the spec. If they're a draft spec, again, this is mean a draft. So it means that you're not sure yet. You're just testing it with the supplier. So therefore, this is not necessarily can be, the supplier can always be in compliance because it's still a draft spec, and you're not sure, and you may change certain things. Because of that, you need to have a time limit for a draft spec. Proprietary ingredients, formula, you want to make sure you protected it if they are proprietary. Your supplier may have that, your company may have that. So you make sure that all these are addressed before the spec is being released. All other criteria in the spec, are they enforceable? You want to make sure they are enforceable. If they're not enforceable, then what's the point putting it in the spec? Because the specs are a legal document that you want to make sure your supplier or your vendor will be able to meet that. Procedures, when the supplier needs to change the ingredient and the source of ingredient, you want to make sure there is a procedure that you provide to your supplier that if there is a change of ingredient, that your supplier submit in writing what ingredient that's being changed and why and where the source comes from. And then would this thing change, the ingredient itself. Ingredients in your product that, like I mentioned to you before, can and cannot be substituted. And this is very, again, important because it will make a difference in the quality of your product. Have all key members in your company review and approve the spec. Again, this is can be a legal challenge if some key people did not get a chance to review this because you want the spec to be out by a certain time. Maybe this person is on vacation or ill or something, and then this group may say, well, we never finalized the spec. We never approved the spec. So internally, it can be a challenge within your company. Okay, so I'm just going to open for question and discussion. And my questions to you here is that what do you see your role to be in this topic, and then others in your company? And then I'm just open up for anybody who has questions or suggestions.
All right. Thank you, Angeline, for your wonderful presentation there, and also all of our participants for having cooperated with us. It is time for us to begin the Q&A, and we request all our participants who ever have questions for our presenter to either click on the raise hand option, which is a palm-like icon at the bottom of your participants panel, to ask your questions verbally, that is, or you could post your questions in the Q&A panel so that our presenter could read it out loud and then answer. If for any reason you're unable to ask a question using either these two means I've mentioned already, do share your question with me by chat, and I shall pass it on to our presenter to get that answered. Meanwhile, we sincerely request you to share your feedback in the feedback form that will appear on your polling panel right now. The feedback form has just 8 questions, mostly multiple choice in nature, and it wouldn't take you more than 2 minutes of your time to answer it. The polling will remain open till the end of the session, and you can answer it even after the Q&A is over. Right now, we have the Q&A session, and Angeline is willing to take any questions. Angeline, if you like, since we have a limited number of attendees, I could unmute all the lines, if that's okay. Hello?
Hello? Yeah, anybody?
Hi, Angeline.
Yeah.
Would you like me to unmute all the lines? I'll just go ahead and unmute all.
Okay.
Okay, we just have a question.
Okay, there's somebody asked me here. Okay, what guidelines do you recommend for selecting a sample size? Okay, that's a very good question. And again, upon the product. So what guideline that I usually ask is that, for example, when you are looking at the lot, okay, you need to make sure that in that lot at least take a duplicate sample from the case, a different case. Okay, so one lot you decided maybe take one case from one bag or one case from this lot, and then another case or one bag from another lot, and at least you have duplicate ones. So then you know this is a sample from two different lots, not just one lot. Okay, or production, the same thing. You want to make sure always have duplicates of everything that you want to test. So that's my guideline, because I know sometimes sample can be very, very tremendous. And another thing, especially for microbiological testing, that depends upon what are you looking for. So, for example, if you're looking for pathogenic bacteria, that you want to make sure that you are pulling the sample from like every hour or every other hour. You don't want just a duplicate sample from the whole day, because there's many times certain things can happen. So that is just the guideline that I like to do, but always use duplicate samples. Does that help?
Yes, thank you. I have an additional question.
Yes?
Yes, in your experience, what department of the company manages the purchase specifications?
In my experience, it's the procurement, as far as manage specification, because they are the one that will issue the. In my experience, also a partnership between quality assurance and procurement. So in other words, the quality assurance makes sure that if there is any changes, they are the one that keeps tab of what date, the revision and everything. That's usually in quality assurance. But the procurement are the one that need to make sure that when the spec is being issued, it comes from them. Okay, so then therefore the suppliers know when they receive the spec, they receive from one department, and that is the spec that they have to comply.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
I have another question.
Go ahead.
Sure.
Shelf life question.
Okay.
When you have multiple vendors and you have a similar product,
okay.
and they have different shelf lives,
okay.
What have you done in the past to manage something like that?
Okay, that's believe it or not, that is very common. It's very common with that. So what you like to find out, again, I'll just give you an example. Let's say with produce. Okay, produce is the one that's very common, that sometimes because of Mother Nature control, they were saying, well, from the product, because it has to be shipped from the West Coast to the East Coast, therefore the shelf life may not be as good as the one that doesn't have to be shipped. So you have to know where the source of the product comes from. Okay, so the shelf life may be different if this product is come from the West Coast that has to be shipped all the way to the East Coast, or if the product is, let's say the East Coast customer is the one that needs to use this. Okay, if the product doesn't have to be shipped all the way from the West Coast, then of course the shelf life, can be better, because it doesn't have to go through a lot of changes, a lot of transportation. So because of that, I always like to test them to make sure, test them by appearance. When somebody, let's say you have a product that somebody said is 5 days, another company said 7 days, another company said 10 days. So you test for all the range, and then and evaluate yourself to see, in your opinion, is it acceptable or not. And then also test microbiologically too. So then you'll find out sometimes certain supplier may want to give the farthest they can, but not necessarily has been validated. So what you're doing, basically validating it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other?
All right, Angelina, we don't seem to have any further questions. We could just wait about a minute or so more. Is that all right?
Sure.
Okay. We just give it a minute or so, and we'll see. Just I'd like to remind all attendees, all your lines are unmuted, and if you would like to ask questions, Angeline is willing to take any questions that you may have right now.
Yeah, and then also, if you prefer to ask questions in private, that you can email me, or you can email Global Compliance directly, and they will forward that questions to me. And my email address is angeline@bbfoodsafety.com. And so you can email that directly to me, the questions. So, if it's something that you don't want, if it's a private question, I'd be glad to answer that. And so that's, or you can go ahead and go to my website. Also, there is a question that you can submit directly there. And my website, as you see on the screen. And here, for some of you that did not attend my webinar on the product recall and on improving sanitation, so there are a recorded webinar that you can purchase from Global Compliance.
All right. Thank you, Angeline. I don't see any further questions. Could I conclude the session for you then?
Sure.
Thank you so much, Angeline. All right. I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank all our participants once again for having taken part in this webinar. I would also, if you would like to get in touch with us, you could send us an email to webinars@globalcompliancepanel.com. If any of you feel that your team members, your colleagues or friends might benefit from this webinar, we are happy to inform you that it will be available in the recorded format, and it can be purchased from our website, or you could call us at 1-800-447-9407. We welcome your suggestions and feedback or ideas on how to improve our webinars. We are happy to, and if you would like to suggest a topic or desire a customized corporate training, online or on-site, we ensure that whatever is your training necessity, it will be our priority. We look forward to having you with us again sometime soon, and for your continued patronage, on behalf of our presenter, Ms. Angeline Benjamin, and the Global Compliance Panel team, I would like to say thank you for participating in this webinar, and we do wish you a pleasant day ahead.